Okay, I think that I understand what you mean about trust. That you have to give them your shoulder to lean on, and listen to them and let them know that you were there for them. That your heart bleeds for their problems and that they finally feel free of all this emotional pain and that they're able to move on and then maybe learn to live and maybe learn to love again. Is that what you're really trying to achieve with these interviews, Sir David?
Well, no, that's not at all what we're trying to achieve, but that's an awfully sweet sentiment, Mr. Wiggles, and I forget you are still quite young and wide-eyed into this sordid world of broadcast journalism, so let me enlighten you a bit. What we are trying to achieve during the interview process, with a lot of sympathetic nodding of the head, is to lull them into a place of contrived intimacy, so that they can spill their guts to you quite recklessly. That's what the viewers are really tuning in for, and it's not at all that difficult. You don't need any Freudian interview techniques, just simple dime store psychology applies, really. And before you know it, they're opening up like a tin of tomatoes, and out flows a litany of transgressions. I mean, every bit of candy they ever stole from the five and dime, and every test they ever cheated on, every paper they ever plagiarized, or their infidelities, and every sexual deviation that escaped notice or reprimand. And before you know it, you have literally miles and miles of tape, and then the real fun begins in the editing room. You can rather creatively reorder whole sequences and edit out all that dreadfully boring and unnecessary context, and then peddle it off to the Associated Press, pray for a slow news day, and then sit back and rake in the pounds. Of course, the second thing you'll need to do is get a good defamation lawyer, because there'll be a few careers ruined, marriages destroyed, and the like, and so naturally there's a few sour grapes in the lot that will come after you. But by then you'll have much more money than they will, and you'll have much better lawyers.
Well, Sir David, I was thinking of what questions to ask Nixon, and, I didn't want to ask him the same questions that you asked him, and I know a lot of other interviews have probably asked him different questions that he gets used to, like Watergate and China and stuff. So I was thinking of asking him a question that I asked Adolf Hitler. And when I asked Adolf Hitler, it was kind of off the cuff. But I asked him, of all the Peanuts characters, which did he identify with the most? And he said Lucy, which I thought was kind of interesting because, she probably was the meanest of all the Peanuts. So I was thinking of asking Nixon the same thing. I mean, everybody knows the Peanuts and can relate to them. And, he's never been asked that question before, so I think it might give us some new insight, and maybe the public might be interested in seeing what he would say. What do you think, Sir David?
That is an absolutely brilliant and innovative approach. I've never heard of any interviewer invoking the name of the Peanuts to a head of state, and I think the question will both intrigue and perhaps bewilder him, but it could be disarming, and what better a parable for the human condition than the Peanuts? I mean, I can't wait to hear his response.
Oh, well, good, then I would definitely ask Nixon about Charlie Brown. Also, some other questions I were going to ask was there were all these tape recordings of people in the White House who didn't know that they was being taped. And, they saved them all, like every minute of them. And I even listened to some of them, and sometimes they were sort of weird things, like, a person might, like, cut a fart, and then everybody would laugh and talk about it when that person left the room. And one time it was Brezhnev, so they really shouldn't have been laughing, because he could have dropped, like, a real bomb on us. But anyway, they taped all that, and then there were these 18 minutes of blank tape. So I would also like to know what happened during those 18 minutes of tapes. Then also, a few years ago, some nice wrinkled up old man came forward and said, "Hey, guess what? I'm Deep Throat." And there were some people that didn't believe that he was Deep Throat, and they thought Deep Throat was like a whole lot of people. So I wanted to ask him about that too.
Well, yes, Mr. Wiggles, those 18.5 minutes have captured the imagination of the public, and considering what did wind up on the tapes, there's no telling what sort of naughty things the President might have been up to. Perhaps you can get him to comment on it, and maybe even on the identity of the real Deep Throat. He has been dead for 16 years, so he's bound to be a bit rusty, and he may be more willing to open up to you.
Well, Sir David, your interviews were so famous for their time. 45 million people watched it, and, you know, it went over 3 days and still people watched, even though some parts of it were kind of boring. But, the most part, you really got the president on the ropes. And then, I just don't want people to think about your interview and then, look at my interview and then make comparisons back and forth and things. I just want people to kind of look at my interview for like their own little merits. But I don't want people to make comparisons or for me to do anything to take away from the good work that you did so long ago.
Well, Mr. Wiggles, it is so kind of you to respect and want to preserve my legacy of the interview those many years ago, and we can't help it that there'll be people that will naturally want to make comparisons. And I have a feeling once people look at your interview and then out of curiosity go back and look at mine, they'll understand that the context and the times are much different. And Nixon was only a few years post-Watergate during my interview. He'd never addressed it in public, and you're interviewing many, many years after that, and much more is known about Nixon. The tapes have been released, and deep vote coming forward. The pool of content you have is much different. But the real landmark event here is this is the first time that a dog has ever actually interviewed a former head of state. So that's not going to be lost on the public. There's going to be a great deal of excitement. And I think that your youth and your cute looks, if I don't mind my saying so, are all going to be very disarming to the president. And I think that he may open up to you in a way that he didn't open up to me, and feel a bit more comfortable, and perhaps you'll get some revelations that are unique to your interview. And I think that our interviews will more likely complement with each other rather than compete with each other. So don't worry, I think my legacy's intact. But one thing I did want to ask you before I forget is, are there things, being a dog yourself and having dog viewers and dog friends, that you'd like to know just from a dog's perspective of the president?
Well, yes, there is. It's famously known that Nixon had a dog named Checkers, a little black and white Cocker Spaniel, and he did a famous speech on TV because he must have done something wrong. I think like he spent some money he wasn't supposed to spend, and then he had to go on TV and tell everyone how much money he had, or like how much money he owed, right down to the money under his sofa practically. And he acted all sad and said some nice man gave him a little doggy, and his daughter named him Checkers, and he's not giving him back. And it was called the Checkers speech. So I guess people gave him a break, and he didn't get no trouble. But lots of people think talking about Checkers is what saved him, and some people think that maybe he exploited Checkers a little bit.
Yes, Nixon was accused of some financial improprieties as a candidate for the vice presidency, and he did indeed appeal to the public quite successfully with his Checker speech, which is where the president really mastered the lifelong skill of transgressing and groveling publicly for redemption and getting it, then transgressing again, but after Watergate no amount of touching anecdotes and puppy dogs was going to get him off the hook.
I was thinking of interviewing Checkers himself, just to find out different things, like, was he fixed, or did he have a girlfriend, or what was the dog food like in the White House, and also Nixon spent a lot of time with Checkers. There's lots of pictures with Checkers sitting on Nixon's lap, and everybody knows that dogs can understand things, so I would like to know what was Checkers, was he involved in any way in the White House cover-up? What did Checkers know, and when did he know it? Or maybe he knew about it, and he was trying to warn the president, like, hey, you gotta stop all this stuff. You're gonna get us kicked out of the White House. It's going to be bad.
That would no doubt be a very fascinating interview with Checkers, but I would not try to do it in advance of Nixon. First of all, Nixon was probably terribly afraid of being upstaged by a dog, and he may be somewhat protective of Checkers, and I know that Checkers himself may be a very private person, or canine. There was some speculation long ago during Watergate that he might have been homosexual and liked mixed-breed dogs, hence the name Checkers. It was never really reported because there was obviously so many larger crimes and news going on at the time. And Nixon, probably being the shrewd businessman that he is, might command a steep fee for Checkers and certain niceties like dressing rooms and special bottled water which your show may not be able to accommodate.